I'm Atalanti Moquette, the founder of Giving Women. And as we have quite a few people that don't know our work, probably, I'm just going to say a few words about what we do. Giving Women is a membership organization. We were based in Geneva and in Zurich, in Switzerland, but we have members from all over the world now. We're growing. And the purpose of our work is to support by capacity building grassroots women-led programs, helping them to get grant, as I say, grant ready and to professionalize. This work is done by our incredible membership, which is growing every day and allowing us to do more and more work with projects. So, this is a call out. Those of you who like what you see today, join us because this is an incredible community, a learning community, and we'd love to have you on board. Part of our work is also because where we sit in wonderful Geneva, and we're surrounded by the UN, amazing INGOs, NGOs, activists. One of our aims is also to bring awareness about issues that relate not only to philanthropy, but particularly to women's issues. And so we do these panels on a regular basis. We try and do 10 a year. And we're very grateful to our wonderful moderator, Katharina Samara-Wickrama, and she brings joy into everything that we do, even in moments when things are tough. And things are tough at the moment. So I think this is really important to remember. We need to find the joy in our lives. Um, Today, we're going to talk about feminine leadership. And I have to say, the part of the preparation for the panels that I enjoy enormously because it's sometimes I hear the most interesting conversations as we prepare for these panels, and you're going to be party to this. And there was discussion about why feminine leadership, why are we talking about feminine, not feminist, not female. And these are questions I think you need to think about. We were very clear of why we wanted to call it feminine, and you're going to hear about it in the panel. And it's really as Katharina said, it seems to be a topic that is really, really important today, especially as what's coming out of the US and this return to what they call masculine leadership. And we really see this discussion as being a way of looking at leadership in a very, very different way, and why it's important and what are the changes that can come out of it. So you haven't come here to hear me. I pass it on to our jubilant Katharina, who will take it from here. I just want to take this opportunity to thank everybody for being here and for our wonderful panel.
Thank you so much, Atalanti. And yes, thank you all for joining us today. And thank you, Atalanti and Giving Women for the opportunity to hold this panel. As Atalanti just said, I think this is actually a real moment that we're seeing with a particular style of leadership around the world right now, and particularly if we can say it from the United States, which is influencing a lot of things. And I was just saying earlier to Atalanti, I think Giving Women is often really prescient about the panel selection of issues to discuss. It always feels like, oh, that's a topic that's really important right now. So I think the significance, as Atalanti's also said, is how leadership and styles of leadership, what the different styles will mean for justice, for the work of civil society who is holding government and leadership to account, for the work towards justice and rights, and what that means for decision making and power, and what leadership means for the type of change that's needed so that everybody can access their rights and thrive. Before we get started, I've got a little exercise that I'd like you to think about throughout the panel discussion. In 2016, I was at the Association for Women in Development conference in Brazil, and they ran this really excellent exercise throughout the whole week where they asked all of the participants to think about, in my perfect world where feminist leadership is a norm and women are equal leaders, how would government, the country or community be different? So what would it look like in a perfect world if we had the kind of leadership, feminist leadership, human leadership that we thought was necessary? How would it look different? So I'm going to give you some, and I want you to be as expansive and as crazy as you can. I'll give you a couple of examples of what came out so you can have some ideas to think around. One that I absolutely loved was laughter and joy would become the currency, so that the richest people in the world would be those who made others laugh and brought joy. Another great idea was love would be the foundation principle of all foreign policy decisions. So I can't imagine what would foreign policy look like for Donald Trump if he led with love rather than whatever it is he's leading with right now. So those are a couple of ideas to get you thinking. And yes, towards the end, we'll put those thoughts into the chat box, and we can share some of what it is we imagine a joyful, thriving world would look like. So I'm not going to introduce the panelists one by one. I'm not going to tell you their bios. I'm not going to talk about the great work that they do because we don't have a huge amount of time today. And all of that information is available in the invitation. So you can see those the important work that they're doing and learn a bit more about their background. So I'm going to just kind of launch right in, and I hope that's going to be okay with you all. So the topic, as Atalanti led with, is feminine leadership. And as I told Atalanti, when I first read it, I kind of like, my heart went, because that's not a way that I think about leadership. I think about feminist leadership, women in, what is feminine leadership? So I'm going to turn first to Nadine. Nadine is a CEO and author, a strategist, and a leadership coach. This leadership is Nadine's happy place and the place that she has a lot of knowledge to share with us. So Nadine, talk to us about what is the difference between feminist leadership, feminine leadership, female leadership. Can you talk us through some of the differences? Thanks.
So feminist leadership challenges power structures and harmful systems. It's about disrupting them and creating systemic change. It's outcome driven, and it actively promotes the inclusion of women and other marginalized groups in decision making and implementing progressive social justice issues. You can think of it as 3 R's: rights, representation, and resources. Feminist leadership directs funding and support towards advancing women's position, participation, and wider inclusion in society. It's proactive, and men, women, and gender nonconforming people can be feminist leaders, i.e., everyone can promote equal rights for everyone. And I've been a proud feminist since the 1960s. To give you an example, the Global Institute for Women's Leadership was founded by former Australian Prime Minister Julia Gillard. And I love its acronym, GIWL. They pronounce it Jewel. And it uses a whole of society approach. And it's just one of numerous global organizations that work for gender equality in business, government, nonprofits, the media, academia, and all other sectors. Now, feminine leadership is different than increasing the number of women in leadership position. It describes the qualities that are so-called feminine characteristics, that is, empathy, nurturing, collaboration, sensitivity, intuition, those qualities that contribute to a more holistic, inclusive, and relational approach to leadership. Commonly understood as embodied only by women, I again believe that men, women, and gender nonconforming people can exhibit these traits. And everyone can benefit from, but also be limited by the stereotypes of what's considered feminine leadership. The strong benefits are that people can embrace their emotions, trust their instincts, and feel free to be more empathetic, qualities sorely needed in today's male-dominated world that sadly is only becoming more so that way throughout the world. But while these are wonderful traits, there also are downsides. Women can sometimes hold themselves back as culture dictates a caretaker role versus commanding authority role in feminine leadership. And because we've been acculturated to be nice and not claim space, we often give away our power and don't own our own accomplishments. So I think that we need to find a balance between what's typically called masculine leadership, i.e. confident, assertive, etc., positive masculine, not toxic masculine, and feminine leadership, caring, compassionate, etc. And that's what I seek, holding a balance of confidence in myself while deeply caring for others.
Thanks. That's really helpful. Fawzia, I'm going to turn to you. Nadine talked a little bit about the kind of the counterweight to feminine leadership being masculine leadership. And recently we heard Mark Zuckerberg celebrate the return of masculine leadership in the US, kind of as if we'd somehow drifted away from it being a norm. And to claim that women even have a vaguely comparable say in the world as men is really, I mean, inaccurate and kind of bizarre. Today, globally, 87% of billionaires are men. That's changing, but that's what it is right now. 93% of heads of government, 73% of parliamentary members, 85% of movie directors, 95% of CEO positions, and 80% of corporate board members are all men. So I'm really not sure what this, drift to the feminine has been and the need for us to return to the masculine is, but nevertheless, that's what he said. And Fawzia is an Afghan politician and women's rights activist, and she's a peace negotiator. When I looked in her bio, she was described as a former member of parliament and VP of the National Assembly of Afghanistan. Quite honestly, since she wasn't elected out of office, in my mind, she is still a politician and still a parliamentarian, even if she's in exile right now. So Fawzia, you are a parliamentarian in what could be argued as one of the most patriarchal or masculine dominant nations in the world. How do you see masculine leadership as being different to feminine and feminist leadership? And talk to us about your experience of what that has brought to your country.
Thank you very much, Katharina. And I would like to also thank the Giving Woman, Atalanti, Kathleen, and all of the supporters and friends who are in this call today. Just before getting to the question you raised, Katharine, I see, the invisible power of sisterhood and solidarity when we just, it's a little bit of personal experience, reflecting on my personal experience. When I actually first created our own organization called Women for Afghanistan, a Geneva-based organization, I was basically struggling how to find friends, etc. And Giving Women was the first organization to extend a hand of solidarity. And eventually we had a very successful year of 2024 in terms of amplifying the Afghan women voices. But to the question you raised, Catherine, I wasn't able to hear the first part of what you said because I think the internet connectivity was not very good. So I lost the beginning, but I got the question. I think I must say 21st century is a difficult year for women movements, be it women leadership in politics or grassroots level or at social level or at any level. 20th century, women had a lot of progress, including the rights to vote. And in fact, to that extent, women in Afghanistan had the right to vote before women in Switzerland did. Yes, actually, almost 15 years before women in Switzerland did. So, the perception I think most of my sisters and friends across the world have of the women of Afghanistan is a very different perception. But the reality is that it's because of the war, the 4 decades of war, that we are where we are now. But going back to the progress the women movement had in 20th century, I think is enormous. And I think thanks to women who have the generation before us who actually not only struggled but put their lives at risk, because freedom comes with a risk, and it's not easy. 21st century is, I guess, a decline of many of the values that we have taken it for granted in many parts of the world. Obviously, conflict play an important role. Women being, used as a weapon in, conflict-related violence. But also women leadership, if there is no, in many countries, there are quota for women who are in the offices in their constitution. Sometimes I wonder if there was no quota, how would the natural participation of women in political sphere and leadership would be. So there are declines. And I think the decline is for 2 reasons. First of all, the recent assessment that was conducted shows that women challenge the authoritarian and the dictators, basically. It's women who not only from the political leadership offices but also from the grassroots that challenge and dismantle to some extent the authoritarian and the basically the patriarchal regimes. And just example is Afghanistan, you mentioned, after 15th of August 2021, when Afghanistan fall to, or handed over, some people say fall, I call it as handed over to the Taliban. Women were the first movement that resisted the suppressive measures of Taliban. Women from all walks of life, not only political leaders, but also leaders from the grassroots, leaders from social grassroots. And what was interesting for me was that these women were protesting, the young generation especially, they were protesting keeping their identity, feminine identity, the colors, the clothes, because I think traditionally when women go to politics or high-level positions, the expectation is that not only that they should not focus on feminism and feminist foreign policy or feminist social policy or feminist economy, but they also should look like men. So the moment you start putting lipstick or you start putting, a different color of scarf in my case, or wearing a red or, another color, people don't focus, especially your political opposition, the masculine energy, the masculine environment. They don't only focus about how much you have contributed to your country, what your policy is, how you change you are championing, but the focus is on, what is your color of clothes, what's your lipstick, and they use that. And there is no exception to that. Women in the United States, women leadership in Africa, in Asia, in Muslim countries, non-Muslim countries. And I mean, we have all remembered 2016 President Trump and Hillary Clinton election, but even 2009 President Obama, then former President Obama and Hillary Clinton election, because everything was about how Hillary Clinton looked like. So I think it's a common phenomenon. So women leadership actually challenge and dismantle the totalitarian and authoritarian regimes. This is the first thing. Second, women leadership, it's proven that that people seem to trust their female leaders more than the male leaders, because they commit small vision. They do not promise ambitious programs, They commit small and they achieve it. At least in the case of Afghanistan, when I was member of parliament, there were many surveys and assessments that were conducted, and it shows that people seem to be happy with their female parliamentarians because they thought the female parliamentarians don't only talk ambitiously, but they also deliver they talk about daily things that affect people's life, including the roads, including the electricity, including, the hospitals, including the clinics, and they deliver that. So in that sense as well, I mean, the women leadership in offices gave a different perception of politics, be it politics in the office or even in the peace negotiation. When I was in the peace negotiation with the Taliban, I could see how much wisdom we bring to the negotiation. And only now, despite all of that, despite the diversity that women bring to the negotiation or to the peace talks, only 6% of the women negotiators across the world are women. So we are in a decline, and I think it's even more difficult for us moving forward. That's why the solidarity and sisterhood is important. And I think we should not take it granted that I live in the United States, I live in Nigeria, I live in Europe or Geneva or wherever. So I'm safe. As long as I'm here, I'm safe. And my borders are safe, so I don't care about the rest of the world. We need to tackle the root cause of the problem because it's a global phenomenon. I stop here.
Thanks, Fawzia. I want to interrogate a bit more something you just said earlier, which was that the population or the people seem to trust women in those roles more than they trust men. I understand what the point that you're making, but then if that's the case, why do they still vote for men? And particularly a particular style of man and a particular style of masculine leadership that is actually the antithesis of what you've described women can bring. So I understand, how women putting themselves forward for election are undermined through these very superficial things that you pointed out men focus on. But why do you think the majority of a population votes for somebody who says they're going to do terrible things to the most marginalized people in the country, for example, if, as you say, there is this widespread trust?
Yes, it's unfortunate to see that, the major institution, including like the UN, still we did not have a woman Secretary General. I hope this year or soon we will witness a woman in the position of UN Secretary General, or the superpowers such as, countries in like United States or even some major European countries have not experienced yet having a female leader. But even if those countries who have experience, that woman leader was hardly able to survive. I mean, with exception of Angela Merkel as the Prime Minister of Germany, women leaders are forced to resign. I think the reason is because the system is being controlled by patriarchy. The system, I mean, look, the media, all the mainstream systems in the United States, for instance, were in the hands of people who actually trusted and wanted to vote for President Trump. The same in Afghanistan. When I wanted to run for presidency in 2014, the level of support I had from the grassroots and like the popular support, I would say, was enormous. And I was like, I'm not even serious in me becoming the president, but maybe one day, you never know, with the level of support I have, maybe I will become the president. I wanted to run because I wanted to demonstrate that women can dream high, and even if the challenges are as big as a woman in Afghanistan, they can still dream of becoming the president of that country. I wanted to demonstrate that perception and that perspective of women, but the level of support I got was enormous. But what happened then? The system, because the system was not in my control. So what they did was they changed the electoral law, and the procedure so that, when they were registering for presidency, I was not 40 years old, which was the criteria for a woman for a candidate to be running for president. So I think it's the system that is being controlled, and especially the core system, the important, we call it the spine of the system, is being controlled, unfortunately, by the men. And also, when I talk about decline of our, rights and, what we have achieved, I see that there is also a tendency among the younger generation that they don't want to go to that spine of the system. They don't want to enter the no entry zone. They don't want to go to the red lines, because the generation before us dare to, put their lives at risk to get the right to vote. I wonder how many of us now, in the global north especially, can put their lives at risk, can take that level of risk to ask for that small progress on women rights. So I think we have a long way to control the whole system, which is now a patriarchal system.
Thanks. I'm going to turn to Vongai now. Sorry, I can't see everybody on the screens. So I feel a bit sort of handicapped, but I know that you're there, Vongai. And
I'm
so
here.
I know you are. I feel your presence, sister. So I want to turn to Vongai. Vongai is the founder of the AFWAG, which is a network of women's organizations across Africa, working towards a world in which women and girls all thrive and enjoy their rights. Vongai, Fawzia has just talked about how the system is managed, guarded, gate-kept by the patriarchy. And she talked about, some of these kind of backsliding that we're experiencing. Given all of that, why do you think feminine and feminist leadership is important?
No, thank you so much. I first of all, I just want to acknowledge what Fawzia has said. I was just having so many notes in my head. I think what you have said really, before I even say the definition, what Fawzia said really reinforces how we really need to talk about this feminine leadership. Because as she was talking around how challenging it is to navigate this broken system, I think for me, I was thinking, do we keep trying to fit in this broken models, or do we imagine leadership altogether? And I think for me, that's why I think this topic of feminine leadership is important. So right now, as we all know on this call, the world is in crisis, and the way we have led up until now is failing. Trust is eroding. I was having so many conversations with friends across the globe, and you hear left, right, and center that trust is broken. Inequalities are rising, and I know at the moment we're talking about Trump, but there are so many issues, even as I was hearing from Fawzia, where you think, where has equity gone? Where has inequality gone, right? And then there are so many institutions that are crumbling down under the weight of outdated power structures. So what I then say is that leadership is built on control right now, exclusion, hierarchy, and everything, you name it. However, if we know all these issues that I'm talking about, they cannot be solved if we do not have, collaboration, empathy, inclusion, etc. And that's what exactly is what feminine leadership brings. For me, it's not about making leadership softer, because I heard someone say women are softer. For me, it's about making it smarter, stronger, and built to last. When I think about what feminine leadership does, I say it redefines power. It demands shared leadership that dismantles all these rigid systems, right? I come from Zimbabwe, and all the time we're talking about hierarchy and everything else that makes it very difficult sometimes to navigate this space. And I've seen actually around me so many times when people hoard for power, but you always think, gosh, the strongest leaders are not those that hold power, but they're the ones that are sharing it. I loved, one quotation that I read from Nelson Mandela, I think on one of the books that was written about him. He said, leaders who want power build a kingdom, but a leader who shares it creates a legacy. So for me, again, this is what feminist leadership is all about. It disrupts adaptability and, it makes us become super, super connected. But unfortunately, again, we cannot build this if we use the same broken systems or tools that built it in the first place. I think, again, going back to you, Fawzia, you really named it. I think there were a few things you said around systems controlled by patriarchy. And you talked about the spine. You said the spine of the system is controlled by men. So again, when we think and look at all those things, we cannot, the future won't be built by those same powers that are really benefiting from it. So I think for me, I'll probably say, last on that question is that the current playbook of power must be rewritten, right? Not just revised, because there is no way we would achieve, or even we can think about feminine leadership, because it's about leading a way that moves people, that transforms systems, right? But that creates impact that lasts beyond one particular leader. And it's not about gender for me. It's not about gender, but it's a mindset. And that's why I think it's very important.
Thank you. I love that you pointed out, do we want to fit into this broken model? I'm old enough that when I started working in the UN a big number of years ago, 30 something years ago, we were talking about mainstreaming gender equality. And I kept thinking, yeah, but if the mainstream is filthy, why do we want to jump into that? That's like, doesn't make any sense, right? And I think, over the years, we've actually learned exactly what you've described, Vongai, probably to our detriment, because rather than building new systems, we've done everything we can to like squash into whatever this system is and try and make it work for us. I want to turn to Florence now. Florence is the director of Media Matters for Women in Sierra Leone. Media Matters for Women is an organization very dear to my heart, where it brings information and technology to women in the most underserved and remote parts of Sierra Leone. So Florence, from your perspective, why do you think feminist leadership that you show up with at Media Matters for Women, why do you think it's been important in the context of women in Sierra Leone?
Thank you very much, Katharina. Thank you to Giving Women and to all the wonderful panelists. I think this space is really needed, and these conversations are very important. I will start by saying the world needs feminine leadership now than ever before. It is not about gender, it's about leading with empathy, collaboration, and a deep commitment to the well-being of people and the planet. The world is not getting better every day. And, for me, I think a leadership which shows empathy, a leadership where you show compassion, you can go beyond the output of your colleagues is really important. And as a post-war country, Sierra Leone, we have a lot of challenge, in terms of building the mindsets of human being, the trauma. So for me, I think dealing with last mile communities, getting people in a balanced situation, balanced mindset is so important, Katharina. We designed a project which we called Under the Tree. And I realized that creating that environment where women are able to share their stories and also able to get others to listen to them and share the same story is so important. So for me, I think, it's not about masculinity. It's about a leadership that shows more compassion, more sustainable, and more inclusive. We need a society that should be more inclusive. And for us as a women's-led organization, we have seen a way it's part of us in Media Matters for Women, and working with amazing women across UK and the US, where you can share your stories, whereas you have somebody to listen to you, creates a whole lot of difference when it comes to your output. And that is one thing that we have used as a core value, even to where we operate in our communities. We create that space where women feel like this is our space where we can share our stories. This is our space where, our emotions, somebody is there to listen to us, and somebody is there to share those stories. And I think sometimes the work environment can be so toxic, and as having that feminine leadership, you should create that space for people. And one of the things I always say is we should lead and in empathy and listen and provide psychosocial support, which is really, really important. So for me, I think it's an important sector where we have to build trust, strong relationship, and encourage ethical and sustainable decision-making within women-led organizations. And feminine leadership is critical at this point as the world is faced with so many crises.
Thanks, Florence. Thank you. I'm gonna turn to Domtila. I think that it's really important point you make about the value of listening.
Yes.
So I'm going to turn to Domtila now. Domtila is also another change maker with Jewel. Nadine started out introducing us to Jewel, and both Florence and Domtila are Jewel change makers. Domtila is a frontline activist leading an organization to end FGM in Kenya. Domtila, can you talk to us from your perspective? How do you think we recognize the value and importance of feminine leadership, feminist leadership, and more women in leadership? How do we get more women leaders? I mean, Fawzia talked about how they're trusted, and yet the backbone of the system is actually managed and guarded by the patriarchy. But so how are we going to get more women leaders into positions of authority? What are some of the barriers, especially for rural and remote communities, women in those communities who are going to have a harder time accessing information? I mean, Media Matters for Women is working on that. So what are some of the barriers for them, and what do you think needs to change?
Thank you very much. I want to thank the organizers for this convening. First of all, for recognizing that there's need to connect the different voices across the space, such that we are not only talking on a global or a national platform, but also taking into consideration the grassroots voices. So I really appreciate that recognition, because that is also where a lot needs to change. Having worked on FGM and child marriage for close to 10 years, just before I left university, I have experienced quite a lot of issues and multi-layered of challenges that women experience every day just to make it to the next level, just to make a slight move, especially from a grassroots perspective, because that's where I was born and raised, and I've lived there all my childhood and my adult life. So I can say that at the grassroots level, I think we will be talking about a completely different, having a completely different conversation, because there are a number of issues that women still are struggling with to just get to this point where we're talking about women occupying the political positions. And when you say, Katharina, that the backbone of the system is owned by someone else, the men. Yeah. So for me, I feel sometimes like we are, as women, we have been made to believe that we are in a world that doesn't belong to all of us. Same for the politics. It doesn't, it's like, it's not our, it wasn't meant for us. It wasn't built for us. We are only just trying to fight for position to be given to us. And they make it look like we don't deserve those positions. So taking it back to the grassroots level, we have had to deal with a number of challenges that we must address at the community level for women to just recognize that they have equal rights as the men. Because growing up, when you are born as a child, first of all, it is declared that you are not equal. Your brother is special, is favored. So children, women, young girls grow up with that belief, having been socialized that this is not your world, this is another person's world. You're just here by the virtue of you being, you have just been allowed to stay, to exist. So I think that is the very first thing for girls and women to realize that this is a world that belongs to all of us. We have equal rights. So at the community level, that is a completely different idea altogether. Women do not recognize that they have the same values, they have the same rights, access, and opportunities as men. So, and we have been working so hard. And how I came to really be very persistent with the cause is because I realized the only way I can be able to do that is, first of all, to ensure that women have access to education. Because I know that when you have education, when you are educated, when you have the knowledge, when you have access to information, you can be able to stand up for yourself before you can stand up for the other person. So that was the very first thing, because I was very lucky to be one of the few people from my village to go to the university. So I used that opportunity not to go and get a job, but to go back to my village and really advocate for girls' education. So that is the very first thing. And that is also another critical barrier, that women have continued to be marginalized on the basis of their limited access to education. That is one thing, but also there's also the idea of resources. From a grassroots and even from an African perspective, women are still even struggling to have access to equal resources, the same as men. So, and we all understand and we acknowledge that politics is very expensive. The campaign itself is very expensive. How it was designed, it wasn't even designed for a poor person. It was created for people who have the money, who have access to the resources. So women don't have those kind of resources. They're even still struggling to support their families at the grassroots level. So that's another key thing. Another element is the lack of mentors, lack of role models. Women in the political spaces are still very few, very few. Those who are already there are being frustrated day and night. They are having it so rough, such that they don't even have room to go back and give back to their communities or to other women. They have no time. They are struggling to exist in a space that wasn't created for them, wasn't designed for them. So that is another challenge. So women are left, there's a whole gap of lack of mentorship, lack of women holding other women's hands, because those who are there are very few and they're still struggling at the same time. And then the other thing is also, women also at the grassroots level, they have multiple responsibilities, and which comes with different priorities. So these same women, because it's in an African setup, gender roles, women have been reduced to be the primary caregiver. Men very rarely support women with those kind of domestic support, caregiving. So they have more time on their hands to advance their education, their different agendas, professional lives. On the other side, women are so much burdened with the responsibilities of the home, of the children, of the families, and other social expectations. So that gives women very small opportunity to think about accessing these political positions. So I will say those are some of them, but at the same time, I think there's room for creating opportunities for women to be able to come and to actively compete for these political positions, because I always believe that, yes, we are not where we want to be, but at the same time, we are not also where we were yesterday, you know? So I believe there's room for us to really work so hard, and even having such platforms like this, just for conversations, to talk about these issues that sometimes they are just like so much ignored. So I think there's room for changing the whole system, because for me, I don't believe in reinforcing what exists. What doesn't work will not work. We should not just pretend that it's working. It's not working. It wasn't meant for us. It's not ours. So I think the baseline is we need to change, to give a complete overhaul of the system, so that we are creating room for new leadership that is also a feminist leadership, but at the same time led with the feminine attributes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Domtila. I love that. What is not working will not work. It's kind of like so obvious, and yet it's a very pithy way of describing it. So some of the what is needed, some of what you talked about was basic knowledge of rights, access to education, access to information, access to resources, role models, creating space. When we had a conversation earlier, and earlier in this conversation, Fawzia talked about quotas, and I know, Nadine, you've talked about that too. It's a pretty controversial idea, especially now we understand how it can be undone in a blink of an eye or a flourish of a felt tip pen. Nadine, talk to us about why you think quotas are valuable, or if they
So
are.
while the idea of quotas is controversial, there's rigorous social research that shows when you increase female leadership, it influences policy outcomes in positive ways. And this is across the board, whether it's more women on corporate boards, more women on in legislatures. I'm an advocate of quotas in all sectors. And when I'm faced with the argument that I always get, well, they could just get the job because they're a woman, or fill in, they could just get the job because they're a minority, any other marginalized group, I always counter them by saying, no, they are the absolute most qualified person, and they also happen to be a woman. And I really think it's important because the evidence shows that, and there's even a tipping point. It's like if there's one or two women in a body, a governing body, as soon as it reaches 3, it tips the whole equation so that the dialogue begins to have more of the attributes that everybody, Fawzia, Vongai, Domtila, each of us have talked about. It increases the likelihood that those issues will be faced and dealt with in a constructive way.
Thank you. Sorry, I was having trouble with my technology. Thank you. You mentioned the research and the evidence that shows the value of having more women in positions of decision making, whether or not that's through the quota system, which reminded me of another piece I read from many years ago now, 10 years ago, in the Lancet, that talked about the role of women's movements and how in countries where you have a strong independent women's movement, then you're much likely to have higher rates of income, education, laws that protect women from violence, and so forth. So I kind of want to come back to you, Fawzia, if I can, and ask you, could you talk to us about, in your experience, the value and importance of women's movements and how they can be part of, breaking down some of these barriers for women's access to decision making?
I think as much as in our parts of the world, like the global south, women movements are very fragile because of the fact that they do not have access to resources. that they are being, tracked down, that they are being attacked and cracked down, and like they are really experiencing very, very harsh attitudes and behavior from the powers. I can say that, for instance, in Afghanistan and even in Iran, women movements are being shut down, they are being targeted. But, and especially the major challenge for the women movements is lack of access to resources, because in some occasions, for instance, Afghan women who were protesting after I left Afghanistan, they were telling us that, for them to have, like even $1 to top up their telephone and coordinate via social media, like WhatsApp group or others, with the rest of the movement to come to the streets or agree on, their next steps, it wasn't possible because simply like that $1 amount of money was not possible for them to have. So access to resources is a major issue, not only in Afghanistan, I think anywhere in the world for women. It's a very unjust world when it comes to women economic ability. So the women movements are very fragile, but I think one thing that unites them, and I have seen that firsthand, is the common pressure that they and the common threat and the common vision. So for 20 years in Afghanistan during the Republic, we have had differences, issues that would stop us from uniting over issues. For instance, when I tabled the law on violence against women in the parliament in Afghanistan, a lot of women organizations opposed me because they thought that this was not the right time for me to table the law on violence against women, that it was too early, and it will further make a women movement and women rights vulnerable if we put it for discussion and like prematurely. Their argument was that we are prematurely putting the woman. Elisa, I think Elisa's phone is not muted. So, but anyways, I hope you can hear me. As a women movement, we're fragile and divided because some of the women movements were telling me that, why did you put this law so prematurely in the debate? It will further, make the women movement fragile and women rights even fragile, etc. But there were others who were supporting. But when we came to 2019 and 2020, when we noticed that there is going to be a peace talks, and the gains of all women movements and every woman in Afghanistan will be at risk, then we naturally divided. So I think the common threat and the common enemy can unite us. I smile because I think we need to have the ability to unite in a normal situation and under normal circumstances. But at least when there are like situations that are difficult and we can face it, we can see it, we can smell it, that it's now going to be difficult, as we smell it now, that it's going to be next few years will be difficult for women leadership, for feminist foreign policies, for feminine politics, for anything related to women is going to be difficult for the next few years. We can smell it. So when we were smelling it in Afghanistan, that it's now going to be our issue that will be at stake. They are going to discuss every other issue among themselves, the main, including the white men from the global north that were coming as diplomats representing their country in Afghanistan, with no woman on the table from their side as well. And when we were meeting them, and when we were asking them that you need to ensure that Afghan women are on the table during negotiation with the Taliban, they were like, but this is a domestic issue. And we had to like also challenge them, because why all of a sudden gender equity and women peace and security, which now we are in the age of celebrating 25-year anniversary, becomes a domestic issue all of a sudden, when the political interest does not resonate with women's participation. Then it becomes a domestic issue, and the global community kind of wash their hands and say, this is not my issue. So then we realize that we need to mobilize as women movement, and that mobilization still continue. Recently we had a the All Afghan Women Summit being organized in Tirana, Albania, where we brought 100 Afghan women together. This was a very diverse group of women, including like some women who were imprisoned by Taliban, tortured. Recently they left Afghanistan. Some women who are still in Afghanistan working under the Taliban, they need to obey the rules of Taliban. So we put them under one room and we said, you can disagree on hundreds of issues, but two issues that you can agree, you need to prioritize. So I think we need to like prioritize and choose our fight carefully. What is it that we want to fight? And then we unite around that, because obviously the expectation from women, Katharina, is that women should not have differences of views, that women should not own political perspective and views. And the moment you want to oppose and have issues and challenge some of the stereotype rhetorics, they blame you or even accuse you for the one that is dividing force, that you're not uniting, that women are dividing. And when men have hundreds of issues to divide, they don't talk about that, right? So they expect us to naturally be calm and say yes, and even if we have issues, don't raise it. But I think we can still disagree on many issues, from the global south to global north, but internally, politically in our own countries. But let's agree on 2 or 3 issues to create that movement around that.
Thank you. I want to go to Vongai because we had an earlier discussion which links, I think, to this. So Fawzia, you just spoke about women who voted against a bill for protecting women from violence. This seems very odd to many of us, I'm guessing. And the idea that women are not a monolith. We're not all the same. We don't have all the same views. So my question is about representation, because also earlier, Domtila spoke about the need to see women. One of the barriers is we don't see women in positions of authority. So I wanted to come to you, Vongai, and ask you is it enough to have women in positions of authority or in high places? Does it need to be a particular type of women, or is it enough to see women's faces there? And does representation lead to systems change?
Yeah, no, I think that's a fantastic question. And you are right that I think Domtila mentioned and did a great question. But I also loved how she talked from an asset perspective around, yes, we are not where we are, but we've made progress. And if I think about what even Nadine shared, I think it's a controversial topic for me around the quota, but I just heard what she said. Because for me, a seat at the table means nothing if it keeps you from raising your voice. Because even from what I'm hearing now from Fawzia, there's something there. And one of the questions I wanted to just throw there is, what good is a seat at the table if it was never built to serve you? So right now, there's so many talks in some spaces around representation, but alone, it's not enough. It creates an illusion of progress, where we can have a tick box that we are making progress, people are heading in the right direction. I've seen so many times around me when women are placed in leadership systems that are already failing, and you end up having to clean up, and then you are blamed for it, left, right, and center. And I remember when we were even having conversations around this panel, I think there's so many things that came up around women who came in or not, and they were trying to clean up broken systems. So for me, here's the reality. Being a woman doesn't guarantee commitment to equity. I want to put it out there. I'm not pushing saying only women can do this, but just as being a man does not prelude you or does not stop you or someone from leading with feminist values. So I think for me, a seat at the table is meaningless if it doesn't really serve you. I think I loved this special quote from this guy called Audre Lorde. He said, the master's tool will never dismantle the master's house. So right now, honestly, all these conversations around quotas, they might move us 1 or 2 steps, in the right direction. But the narrative that starts coming up around women can do this or can't do this sometimes can be toxic in itself. If I give an example of Afwag, I actually saw this, one of our network members who's on this call today. I really saw how, we've seen how at first and how representation without power plays out. this brilliant woman who's leading an incredible grassroots initiative in a community. People love her. She's trusted in a community. She understands their issues, etc., etc. So one day she was finally invited at a high policy dialogue, actually in New York, on gender equity, a space where she never thought she could be invited to come to. And then when she was there, I remember her telling me that, Vongai, like people were talking and there were so many conversations. Anytime she wanted to come in, it was almost she was shut down. Out of about 30 people in the room, there were only 3 women and they were talking around gender issues, and then she was shut down. So for me, the issue is, yes, we can talk about quota. Yes, we can talk about women at the table. Yes, we can talk about a voice in the room. Yes, on paper, that looks like progress. But what's inside? This lady wasn't given power to shape decision. She was there to tick a box and expected to represent women, but not lead on the issues that matter. This is exactly for me why representation without transformation is very dangerous. Because if leadership still operates, again, going back to the issue around the rigid structures, adding more women won't shift power, but it will just rearrange who gets ignored for me, So what I would probably say in kind of closing to your sentence is we need systems that no longer require people to fight for seats at all. Even the fact that 3/4 of the discussion here is women us talking about what's broken, what's not. For me, ideally, we no longer need to have that. That will be feminine leadership. But that is where real power is, and that is where real change is. We don't want more women in the broken system. What we just need to do is to create systems that are not broken in the first place. So Nadine, I'm sorry, for me, I've got serious issues around quotas. I know, yes, it moves us in the right direction, but at the moment, we're trying to fit square plug in a round hole in most of these places. And I'm not trying to say there are so many examples, like if we look around us of women who have really shifted the system, but if you look at what did it truly take for them to shift those systems, most of them, if the truth is to be told, they suffered a lot. They mentally, emotionally, and on every level, they suffer. And the excuses that are given for men are never amounted for them. And I think, was it Domtila or someone who said earlier on, or Florence, around sometimes the expectations that are placed, amongst the women themselves, it's not enough. So honestly, I think we're still a long way to go, but we've made incredible progress. And Nadine, I agree with you, and I'm sure there's so many research, and this is not about you, but I'm just saying, great, we're coming from different perspectives. And I feel so much passion about really pushing those doors so that we no longer need to have like glass ceilings or, doors not being open. Why have the door in the first place? If it's, why close it? Yeah.
Thank you. Nadine, do you want to respond?
Yeah, so I really agree with you, Vongai. Maybe the way I stated it was confusing, but certainly just being a woman doesn't equate with being a more inclusive leader or creating systemic changes. I mean, we only have to look at Marie Le Pen, the leader of France's far-right national rally, who maintains the anti-immigrant nationalist policies of her father, even as she tries to soften the image of her party. And on the other hand, being a more feminine multicultural leader like Justin Trudeau won't necessarily survive tough economic times. So we're definitely living in a time when the rise of autocratic leaders just undermines the rule of law and democratic norms throughout the world. I mean, Freedom House has reported a dire threat that more than 60 countries have suffered a declines in freedom, while only less than 25% improved. And so, yes, systems change is what needed. And I love the gutsy way that you're approaching it, Vongai.
Thank you. Yes, what resonated with me was this expression that Vongai used: representation without transformation is dangerous. I mean, I think that that's very pithy way of describing some of what we see in shifting more women into leadership. And I also liked that you reminded us that we don't want to sit in a space where we just point out what the barriers and problems are, but that we are solutions people. So I want to ask all of you really as the final question. We know that we've talked about being in a dangerous current political climate, but what are the things that feminine leadership could bring to create the change we need to see? And how are feminist and feminine leaders especially equipped to handle the current crisis, do you think? And I'm going to start with Fawzia, if that's okay. I can't see her. Oh, you're there.
Yes. So I think, yes, it's a very interesting question, because the expectation is that we constantly should be able to only counter the challenges that we constantly face, that stop us from, the potentials that we have, to use that potential for otherwise, changing or even creating a system which is woman-friendly, which is feminine, which is, challenging the stereotype status quo, because our energy, our time is constantly being engaged in challenging the status quo that is set for us, and try to redefine the narratives, and try to redefine the boundaries and challenge the boundaries that are created for us. So it's a very important issue, and important question, that how can we actually do that? I think the first is coordination, holding the system accountable by coordination not only among women movement, but among the movement to the media, social media, the use of social media, the use of media, ensuring that there is also coordination with women in private sector, women in business sector, because I think there is a general perspective that women who are in business sector and like philanthropists or women CEOs, they do not have the same problem as we do, as those who are more leading the social and political change, which is not the case. I mean, if you can sit in conversation with women who are CEOs, you see that the extent of problem is not the same, but the problem is there. So we need to also coordinate with them, use the mechanisms that are there for global solidarity, for global rule and order. And in this case, for instance, in the case of Afghanistan, I want all of you, my request to all of you would be to stand in the case of, codifying gender apartheid. Because it was not easy to codify racial apartheid, but it was possible. Now, it's since 2 years, 3 years actually, that we are campaigning to codify gender apartheid, because I see there is a huge disparity between what women in your countries, I'm not saying it's a rosy situation, but in your countries, what women experience and what their demands are, but back home in my country, what the woman demand is, it's very basic. They want their rights to be able to go to school, to be able to go to work, to be able to exercise their rights as a human beings. So they need our solidarity. So we need to really listen, because that small sparkle of discrimination could become a big storm. So we need to really coordinate, hold the international systems accountable, challenge the narratives. And as they say, women dismantle the patriarchy and totalitarian regimes. We need to do that. But in the meantime, I think as, my friend from Vongai, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, as she said, we need to also create our own friendly system. So not only challenge the spine and the nerve of the current status quo, but also create our own. And it's not easy. It's easy to speak among these amazing women with the language that we all agree, but it's not easy. It requires you to put your head every day on a stone and like fight with a stone, and the next day you start again. So it's like that.
Thank you, Fawzia. So Fawzia talked about we can offer coordination across movements and across sectors. We can provide global solidarity. We can challenge the narratives. Florence, what are some of the other ways that feminine and feminist leadership can address the crisis of today?
Thank you very much. For me, I'll start, as a women's-led organization, we believe in movement building. We all have mentioned about the system failing us, but building those structures at community level, supporting the women to understand in making informed decisions and choices, and holding accountable, systems from the rural communities, their families. We know the patriarchal system within homes, it starts from homes. So if we could just strengthen that movement at that point, it comes with a whole lot of difference. And, looking at the dangers, I want to shift the focus on Africa. Africa already faces a lot of challenge when it comes to climate change, political instability, the economy, gender disparity, among others. So feminist leadership applied across, government, businesses, institutions could help transform the continent in several ways. Where women have equal representation, this is where, we believe in getting this movement where women are able to hold accountable, their local leaders, to the councils, to the national leader. And so for me, I think that aspect of movement is really key. Education is power. And we live in a society where many of these women are uneducated, and they just normalize all of this that we're talking here. It's been normalized for them. They see it as this is our faith. But when you create that conversation, when you create that education, when you get them to understand that this is what you can demand, these are your rights, these are the check boxes, then it creates a whole difference in terms of movement, in terms of demands, in terms of getting the wrong boxes that has happened from their homes, where girls are being labeled, in, different ways in Africa, especially in Sierra Leone. They have how they see girls, then that change starts to reach. And when it comes even to the political shift, we have seen women seen as mobilizers, women as, getting a specific role. And I will also want to say that when we have women understanding, it's like we've been socialized that this is what you should do. You are a woman, they have already mirrored you to what you should look like and how your output should look like. But when we start having this conversation, strengthening women-led organizations, supporting women-led organizations, and I'm pretty sure most of the work that Media Matters is doing is the same thing happening in Zambia, where Vongai is doing, strengthening these organizations. Because for me, I can say the systems have failed us. And what is happening in US, what is happening in other countries, it's just an easy copycats for our leaders to bench on.
Thank you for bringing us back to the concept of women as movement builders, women as collaborators and creators of these connective networks that are about bringing change. Domtila, in your experience, what are some of the opportunities that feminine and feminist leadership have for bringing about change?
Yes, like I said before, there's so much potential and the opportunities for us to really change everything and to transform the whole political space. And I think the fact that we, the women who have such access to such information, should first of all take the first lead. We should not stay back. That is the very first. I always believe if you must be the change that you want to see. You know, so it has to start with us, with you, with me, you know. So I believe that this room, we all is not lost. And as colleague put it, Vongai said it very clearly. The women who went before us, or who were before us, they really fought so hard, sweat and blood, to get us to where we are today. So, and we should be able to do the same. And I always believe that I will never want any other woman who has been inspired by my work to face the same challenges that I've had to face, to be where I am today. So what are we leaving behind for the generation that is coming after us? So it has to begin with us. That is the very first thing. If you must really see a change in the space, then we have to do something. And that something does not require much. It just needs to be about where are you seated at the moment? What level of influence do you occupy as an individual and as a collective, as an organization, as a donor, as an activist, as a CBO, like my organization? So if we can come together and utilize those platforms effectively to create awareness around the spaces where we occupy. For example, I live at the grassroots level, and that is, I use my voice. I lend my voice to girls and women, and I remind them every single day without getting tired that this is a space for all of us. We deserve to be here. We deserve equal opportunities. So I preach. I always say, let's preach. We should not get tired. We should preach, you know? And for that to happen, we need to rewrite the whole narrative. The things they told us, the lies they told us, everything they told us about being a woman, we need to change all that. And that can change if we are able to start from the grassroots level with the women, with the girls, the young girls in the schools, out of schools. We are able to rewrite the entire system, our system, where we sit. You know, we need to redefine, we need to be able to demystify all these myths and misconceptions about FGM and child marriage. So that is what I will say as the very first and vocal initiative that needs to be done, because for women to get to even at the level of being able to participate in such a platform today, it takes quite an effort. So if imagine we are how many today? We are 48. We were 54 at a while ago, 55. So imagine if we were having women from across the globe, from grassroots to global platforms, being part of this conversation, listening, contributing, and committing. I think we can make a step further and ahead. So I believe that I just echoing what Florence was saying, no effort is too small to make a difference.
I love that you talk about it, about being about us, about building on the history of who's come before us, and about this kind of like, all is not lost and everything is to be gained. It feels like you're coming back to Vongai's earlier quote from Nelson Mandela about leaders who share power create legacy. We are the legacy of the women that came before us. It's up to us to create the legacy of what.
No one else will do it. It's you and me. Yeah. No one else will do it.
Can I ask you, Vongai, I'm going to give Vongai the last opportunity to talk about what we can bring, what feminist leadership can bring in a positive way. So can we hear from you?
No, thank you so much. I just love what we're talking about, standing on the shoulders of giants who went before us. So I'll share 3 things very briefly, quickly, that I think we can leverage. So I think we need to shift conversation from inclusion to structural change, because there's a lot of how do we include? So because women shouldn't just be added to leadership structures, but we should be designing feminism. Feminist leadership is about redesigning the way leadership works. And then 2, I think, was it Flora or someone else who talked about the scarcity mindset. We should reject that. We do not need to play a handful of seats. We need bigger seats, more inclusive spaces where leadership is shared. I also say, I know that one of the questions we asked around, rather than maybe ask questions around how do we get more women in leadership, should we ask how do we create leadership models that work for more people, really. And I think the last one that I'll say before I say my conclusion is about we also need to invest in leadership development. That's my world, that's my obsession. So many times we talk about mentors, which is great, but we need more sponsors, not just mentors, people who actively open doors, recommend other, people for all sorts of things. So my last closing point is that I was saying to actually one of my team members earlier when we were talking about this, that I think for me, feminine leadership is not about waiting for the world to change, because the change is happening already. I think if I challenge us in passing is that if we are really serious about transformation, we must stop treating leadership as something women need to fight for and start treating it as something that should work for everyone. And the future is not waiting for our permission. It's being built right now, but the only question for us is, are we going to do things differently, or will we continue to play the same rules and then we continue to have panels like this? But today, personally, I was so inspired by this group of women, and thank you so much. And back to you. And I think Demetri said, let's keep preaching. We'll keep preaching around this because we are already on the bandwagon.
Thank you, Vongai. I feel like that's a call to Atalanti and Kathleen. Can we have the panel in a year's time and talk about just what have women done in this crisis moment to alleviate the crisis and push us into a more positive space? Because that's what we're going to do, right? I mean, that's the call from all of you. We're not going to sit on our backsides and wring our hands. That's not how feminists operate. Where this is a call for action, for preaching, and for getting on with it. So with that, is it okay if I open up to questions briefly, because we have 7 minutes? And I'm going to beg Kathleen to watch what's happening because I can't see everyone. Can you do that, Kathleen?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of activity in the
yeah, I see,
in the chat. So, and also you challenged everybody to give their things, so it's hard to see a particular question. So I guess if somebody wants to put up their hand, with a brief question, please go ahead.
I have a question.
Yeah,
I
have a question because I think for me the call to action is we have to dismantle the structures that exist now. And my question is how? And I think that warrants not a year ahead panel, but one very soon, where we can talk about, from where I'm sitting, it's how are we going to dismantle that? How are we going to make those changes? And I would love to hear from somebody who will enlighten me on that.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to share an example to you. We had a program called Sit Under the Tree. And the chief is the custodian, and he has his own structure. And he has his own bylaws, and all the ones behind him were men. And this conversation was triggered with women. All of the women were there. And the women, there was one powerful woman who was there. And the rest of the women were so scared to talk. But we started this conversation on the laws, the legal frameworks, how women should speak up, how to access, how to go to get service delivery. But this woman was so powerful that the rest of the women will come whisper in her ears, and she will stand up and tell the chief, this is what is happening to our women. They need justice. You locked up a man, you locked up a woman, you refused to lock a man who had done equal thing, the same thing that the woman did. And then the chief was so overwhelmed. And I asked the chief, do you have a woman within your governance structure? He said no. And I told him, how much cases do you have? 90% of the cases were issues with women, violence against women. And I asked him, Do you think by having a woman representative will create a whole difference in tackling these issues? And he looked and said, yes. We already have a legal framework in Sierra Leone called the Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment Act, but it is not practicalized. These chiefs have zero knowledge about it. So we are trying to see how. So for me, I think the power of movement building, shifting that power shift where women are more informed in making choices they will be able to hold accountable. It's like, for me, I see it as most of these legal frameworks, most of this system has failed us because we do not even have the ability to operationalize them, to hold them.
So Nadine, from your perspective,
network, getting women to understand that this is the way to go, they can hold these systems accountable.
Thanks, Florence. So movement building and accountability. So yes. Nadine, from your perspective, what you're on mute, Nadine. Sorry, we can't hear.
I'm so moved by what everybody is saying. And my mantra is don't agonize, organize.
Brilliant.
Not only are those who are here doing that, but individuals and organizations around the world are. Right. And having been an activist since the 1960s, I hope that in the cyclical nature of politics and government, we will emerge from these dark times with even more citizen activists, especially women, becoming involved in advocating for progressive policies. And with intersectional organizing, mobilizing now worldwide in a collaborative way, I just have to keep hope alive.
Brilliant. Don't agonize, organize. Wonderful.
And it's what Fawzia said, coordination.
Exactly, right at the beginning. Movement building. Or I agree with you. It's great. We've got 1 minute. Are there any other burning questions? I can't see, sorry. So if not, I might end by sharing some of your thoughts for the perfect world, if I may. A more inclusive, compassionate, supportive, uplifting, and geared towards everyone's success rather than competition and overpowering. Individual success feeding group success, respect and tolerance. A world of peace, understanding, collaboration, where each individual is valued and respected for their uniqueness. What else do I have? Decision-making processes would prioritize collaboration, empathy, well-being of all individuals. Communities would foster environments where all voices were heard and valued. More love and compassion, kindness and less wars, and leadership informed by kindness and compassion. Invariably, the power of sisterhood and solidarity is love. So thank you all for those thoughts on how our world would look if we organize and stop agonizing and build our movements towards challenging and disrupting the systems that are harmful. The world will be a place in which all of us can thrive. So thank you all very much. It's always a pleasure to be with you in this virtual room of really magnificent minds. And I'm going to now hand back to Atalanti. And thank you all the panelists.
So I'd like, first of all, to thank Katharina for incredible moderation, as always, and our really, really wonderful panel who spoke with passion, authenticity, insight, experience, lived experience, which made it all so real for all of us. I think it's encouraging to us to see the amazing work you're all doing in different parts of the world. And I think what we need to do is come together, as Fawzia said, and coordinate and work together for the world that we would like to see. So thank you, everybody. We will be coming back with a sequel to this. So look forward to seeing you. We are planning another panel on the 13th of March to talk about the impact of the decisions made in Washington, particularly on grassroots organizations. So that's what we will be, our next panel will be about. So thank you, everybody, for joining us, and have a wonderful afternoon. The sun has come out in Geneva, thank God. So
Thank you all. You can unmute yourselves.
Thank you all. Bye.
Again.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Katharina,
everyone.
Atalanti, Katharina, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
We need more panels like this in our lives. So wise, deep, and also pragmatic.
Yeah.
that's right.
Thank you, and bye-bye. That was a
Bye-bye.
wonderful.
Thanks, Nadine. Thank you
Bye-bye.
so much. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.